All right, so just in the interest of time, because I don't want to take up too much of Scott's time, I will start the webinar. So I'd like to welcome you all today. My name is Allison, and I am the Senior Lead of Outreach here at the Invasive Species Council, and I am calling in today from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations in so-called West Vancouver, where I am very lucky to live as a grateful guest on these lands. And as a provincial organization, the Council acknowledges the territories of all the Indigenous peoples across BC, where we live and work to maintain healthy ecosystems from all. So I'd love to hear where you're all joining us from today. If you missed it joining earlier, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're from. And if you have any questions during the chat or during the presentation for Scott, please use the Q&A function and we'll make sure to get to those after Scott's talk. So May is Invasive Species Action Month, or ISAM, and it is an action-packed month-long campaign to generate awareness and engage everyone living in BC on invasive species and their impacts. So this year, the first 4 weeks of ISAM are focused on 4 different themes based on our behavior change programs, designed to shift people's habits around some of their favorite outdoor activities that might spread these species. So the second week focuses on PlantWise, which is a program designed for all levels of gardeners in stopping the spread of invasive plants. So as we know, invasive plants can be just as beautiful as non-invasive plants, but they have characteristics that can harm the environment and the economy. So the PlantWise program helps gardeners and industry to understand which plants are invasive and harmful, and how to make plant-wise choices. So that's where our speaker today comes in. Scott will share some top tips for some of his favorite native plants that can transform your yard and garden into a vibrant, eco-friendly oasis free of invasives. So please let me introduce Scott Pearce of Gardenworks. Scott has been involved in the nursery industry for 40 years with a diploma in landscape horticulture from BCIT and experience working in both the wholesale and retail nursery trades. So since 2007, Scott has been a partner at Gardenworks with responsibilities including plant purchasing, merchandising, and marketing. And Gardenworks has 10 locations and has been working with us for over 12 years to help shape the PlantWise and Grow Me Instead programs. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Scott.
Thanks, Allison. Big introduction, and sort of a lofty goal to get to the eco-diverse landscape that you have just described. And so it's sometimes I think the best way to do that is a little bit of time. So I had titled this presentation as Incorporating Native Plants into Residential Gardens, because I think that the best way to approach this might be to, to start where you're comfortable with and start slowly. So, every time we can get another native plant into a garden, it doesn't mean that it has to be a completely native garden, but always thinking about those things as you go through is a really good start. I have wanted to sort of acknowledge that increased interest in native plants for ornamental purposes has been happening for quite a while. It's evident in some of those big landscapes, condo developments and things like that, where landscape architects who have to design those landscapes are including native plants, and also in commercial landscapes. So we're seeing that, and every time you see that, it used to be like ornamental grasses. Nobody used ornamental grasses, and some of those might become invasives for us someday too, really soon. But nobody really used them. But as soon as they started getting used more in landscape designs by on a large scale, people started to notice them and ask about them more. So I think that's what we're seeing happening. But those uses are really quite often typified by big mass plantings, and they don't look much like you would do in your garden, certainly, because the scale is too big, and they also tend to be nothing like what you would see in a native landscape. So that's where we're starting, being happy that that's happened. I've got to move my slide here. Whoop. Why bother with native plants? Why bother? I mean, there's lots of land out there in the world that's covered in native plants. But the native plants, we can generalize and say they're resilient. They're naturally adapted to their unique climate and environment. And they are the preferred choice of native pollinators and many other beneficial insects as well. And you know what? They're attractive additions to cultivated gardens. And this is my personal thing, is that they maintain a link between the natural environment and the gardens we create. So I like the idea that when you leave the natural environment, if you went for a walk along Port Moody Inlet, for example, and went home, that you would not go home to something that was so different that it felt like you were entering another world. So I like that about incorporating native plants. But there are barriers to using native plants. And one is there's a perspective that native plants are boring. There's not much to them, especially when you compare them to colorful exotics like a lot of the flowering annuals that we would use in the spring and summer, or even some of the showiest trees and shrubs that we have. But I don't know that that's true. I call it outdated because I think people just need to understand and appreciate what each plant has to offer. And some plants don't have a tidy habit. Some natives, they might not be suitable for a residential garden. So I use the example of salmonberry or thimbleberry, those two, as being pretty hard to have those in a small space garden in your backyard, so to speak. They certainly can be used in restoration purposes and things like that, but they really are challenging. And it's difficult to get some natives to grow outside their native habitat, even if you can find them. I'd use the example of arbutus or Pacific madrona. It's hard to get it established outside of where it's really growing. And I think there's some good information on why that is. Just got to do with microbiomes in the soil and the relationship they have, and when you take them out of that, I have seen people, they grow them in containers and things. Anyway, that's one. And then availability of many native plants at mainstream garden centers like Gardenworks, where I have a lot of responsibility for what happens in our plant areas. It's limited, so depending on what it is, really hard to find. If you wanted to find the Pacific columbine, I don't think you'll ever find it at a garden center. You might be able to get seeds somewhere though. And then there's a lack of information. So you're trying to promote and inform a very large group of people so that there's some real oomph to the movement. I don't think there's enough information out there. We're trying to work on that. So the good news is there's many native plants that are readily available. They are readily available, and they can be successfully incorporated into residential landscape designs, residential gardens, and even in patio and balcony gardens. So that's kind of the focus of this today. And there's a list that you probably can't read of a bunch of plants. I can read it though, so it's good because it's a little bit of a cheater sheet for me. So these are all plants that at some time or another are available at most garden centers, and the list could be twice this long. Probably you can only fit so much on. And this is a sign that we've just developed at Gardenworks to have it to point people in the right direction. We don't have to dwell on that. Whoop. And then so I said, okay, well, let's do the top 10 like David Letterman would. Not going to be as funny though. And I was choosing the top 10. This is totally from my perspective. You could have a totally different top 10, but they need to be readily available, highly ornamental, and easy to grow. And of course, they have to be native to BC. So I'm just going to go through them. It's going to be, I think I can do this fairly quick for you. Deciduous tree, vine maples, it's like my favorite tree. And it has been for many, many years. So they grow a real range of sizes. They're happy in wet conditions. You see them growing along stream beds, and obviously they're an understory tree, so in a shady spot is best. Don't like getting heated up too much. Very short period of subtle bloom in the spring, and the leaves are bright, fresh in the spring, very bright green and fresh and green. They kind of fade and look a little bit dull in the summer. That's a shot of the bloom and the new growth just emerging, and then they have great fall color. And I don't have a shot of that, but that's one of the things from year to year that you really look forward to seeing. How's the fall color going to be on a vine maple this year? Number 9, because this is David Letterman style deciduous tree that grows up to 20 meters high, obviously extremely recognizable, the official flower of the province, and they may bloom again later in the late summer, and they have a pretty nice display of red fruit sometimes in the summer, and they grow best in sort of a part shade, and at least the trunk should be shaded from the hot sun. They don't like that too much. If the hot sun, a western sun's beating down on the trunk, tree's not happy. And they're really a great specimen tree or tall tree for a native inspired garden. Bit on the large size for some residential, but it takes some time to get to to 60 feet. And there's a hybrid between Pacific dogwood and the eastern dogwood, which is much easier to find because it's not that easy to find the species, which is Cordon stunduli. But Eddie's White Wonder is easier to find, but it isn't truly a native. Very similar. Fair to say, one thing about Pacific dogwood, I think they're kind of a little bit susceptible to a disease. The disease called anthracnose, and it results in leaves that don't look so special, a lot of discoloration or browning on the leaves, and it's worse if we have a wet spring. But the trees seem to sustain it just fine. It's not like it kills them very often. It doesn't work. Got to go down one slide. There you go. Didn't have a picture of that one for you today. Red flowering currant is number 8 on the list, and it's probably number 1 for some people. It's amazing. The bloom is so colorful, and it's long lasting, and it comes along right as forsythia begins to fade. And so you can always it's one of the ones I use to judge, are we behind or ahead in the season? And I'm saying this year way behind, probably 3 weeks behind on the ones by my place. Leaves are nothing special through the summer, but I really like the winter silhouette of the shrub. And as a taller grower, really, you're never going to expect it to be any less than 6 feet high unless you're pruning. And so great for the back of a shrub area or as a specimen. And very, very tolerant of dry conditions. Does equally well on the coast as in the Okanagan. Does well in full sun or part shade. And I think just a great plant, very indispensable. Again, hard to find the species, and if I run out of time, I won't talk about this too much, but the idea of species versus cultivars or cultivated varieties of plants and how that relates to native plants, and there's a term for that called nativars. So I'll just leave it at that. If you didn't know that, it's a fun term. And there's a showing it just starting to flower, and then when flowers more open. And those are probably, I don't know, they might be a different cultivar. King Edward VII, or it could have been the 8th, I always lost track, is the most common one you see around. Okay, number 7 is serviceberry or Saskatoon berry, sometimes called amelanchier, and pretty good plant for the drier conditions of the Okanagan, but you do see it growing native on the coast as well, not as much, I think. And they're variable in height quite a bit, up to close to 20 feet, 7 meters. And they have a really great show of white flowers pretty much now, and in maybe a little earlier starting, and then dark purple berries in the summer that are the classic Saskatoon berries. There are many cultivars available. There's just the blooms. Cultivars like Smoky, which has been around for 60 or 70 years, and that it was that one was introduced because it has a little bit larger fruit, I think, really, and a really good prolific bloomer. So it became almost the standard. In some people, Saskatoon pie is it's a big thing. My dad was from Saskatchewan, just always wondering why we didn't have Saskatoon pie here. And I'm like, because there's blueberry pie. But really a nice plant. And you can use that one as a tree or as a shrub. You can sort of encourage it to grow tall and be tree-like. Always be multi-stem though. Number 6 on the list, snowberry, which is something we see on the coast mostly. You see it in a fairly shady condition or a part shade condition. The white berries are the thing. The flowers aren't really noticeable. They're there, small, but then the berries are big and fat and white. They like moist, well-drained soil, and there's many cultivars, actually, getting back to that one. They're used quite a bit in cut flower arrangements. I know a guy in Langley who has, rows of them in his field to use specifically as cut flowers for sells them at the flower auction. And there's many different shades of pink available in the cultivars. Whoop. And there's a shot of the white berries. They often have a little bit of that sort of discoloration, but man, they're really persistent. They last really nicely through winter. They don't disappear right away. The birds don't get them all. Whoop. Kinnikinnick is my number 5, super useful plant, very well used in commercial landscapes and all that good stuff as a ground cover. It's got red berries in the summer that are the most showy, but it's got pink bell-shaped flowers that are beautiful as well, and quite showy. It's amazing. It'll grow in full sun part shade. It's not too happy in a full shade location. Like some moist, well-drained soil, some really beautiful patches of that through the Okanagan. I just remember seeing one in Vernon. And it's not great in cut flower arrangements in the fall. That was from the previous slide that got snuck on there. So if you're looking at the slide, sorry about that. Another one with a lot of cultivars. You can start naming them probably on 2 hands. Vancouver Jade was a UBC cultivar, and the leaves definitely are glossier and showier. There's varieties like Emerald Carpet, Massachusetts, that all have little bits and pieces. That's a great ground cover though, and we'll talk about at the end if we have time where that could be used instead of something else. Number 4 is Salal, which is probably everybody's got to know Salal. Very useful on the coast. It will grow in shady spots in the Okanagan, and that it's cold hardy to do that. It just needs the shade, doesn't love the heat at all, even though it'll grow in full sun on the coast. It can grow it's really variable from growing only 18 inches high in an area that's a little sunny and with not as good as soil, but in the shade with lots of moisture. It'll go up to a couple feet high easily. Great bell-shaped pink white flowers in the spring, and then dark blue berries. Also bronze new growth in the spring. So we're talking about that ornamentals, or that native plants don't have ornamental value or some way, that they're not showy. This thing has like 3 seasons of interest. It's got the spring blooms, but it's got new growth after the spring blooms are starting. That's really beautiful. And then it's got the dark blue berries. Lots of uses for the berries as well. And like some moist, well-drained soil, forms a pretty dense clump of stems. If it would be almost a thicket, I guess. But sometimes it only is growing 18 inches, and it's not a thicket because it's so short that it's not like you have to work your way through it. And there's cultivars of that now coming out. There's one that's produced by a nursery in Mission that's introduced this cultivar to the nursery trade, everything, called Cascade Sunrise. And the new growth on that is just much more showy, and still does the same blooms. The blooms look the same and act the same. So I don't have Cascade Sunrise on here. There's just showing a good shot of the leaves and the little pink bell-shaped flowers, which is, those are all part of the heath family, or the Ericaceae family, which is what rhododendrons and heathers and maybe kinnikinnick too are all part of. Number 3 is Sea Thrift. Sea Thrift is really fantastic. Little clump of little green foliage, tough as nails, takes a sandy soil, high in salt, and thrives as great choice for not only for rock gardens, but it does really well as a container plant. And I've had the experience of having people looking for something that does really well in a container on like a 20th floor balcony where the wind's whipping around all the time, and they planted their whatever up there, naming a calibrachoa, and they just got all beat up, and yet the armyria will do really well. And there are lots of cultivars of that available. So the species is pink, but there's cultivars that are available in shades of pink and white as well. And there's lots of armarias or thrifts in the world that aren't Armeria maritima, and then those aren't necessarily native to the province. So I got choose Cascade Oregon grape is number 2, which is a broadleaf evergreen shrub that you probably see Oregon grape a lot, but this is the variety or the variety or the species Mahonia nervosa as opposed to Mahonia aquifolium. That's the Oregon grape. Much lower, much more diminutive, has a red stem across that goes through the leaf and the stem, and kind of attractive and fluffy little one, and much shorter, likes a dappled shade and works really well as a filler if you're thinking about design between taller plants. And it's got short, smaller yellow flowers, and then it has a edible tart blueberries. But you don't see it nearly as much as Oregon grape. I think it should be used more. It is more harder to find. And so there it is, Mahonia nervosa. I think that's just outside my door right now. And then this is the Mahonia aquifolium, which has a different leaf. If you look at the two, just the way they look, and look at the red stems on nervosa and how low it is, and then this thing grows up to be a beastie one. But it's really a great plant too, native plant. But it's not as it's pretty ubiquitous. You know, you see it in a lot of places being used as a landscape plant and that. So, you know, might be something you want to consider when you're trying to find fun plants. Any other pictures? Oh, there's another one too. That's probably Lionsgate Hospital is my guess. And it really shows off the blueberries, and that's actually Oregon grape, Mahonia aquifolium as well. And then you're all thinking, number 1, what's it going to be, right? I am. Oh, and so I couldn't do that. So there's 3 number 1s. And it's western sword fern, deer fern, maidenhair fern. There's other ferns like licorice fern that are native as well. This one is these 3 are my faves and really, really great landscape plants. The 2 are the deer fern and the western fern are evergreen, but maidenhair fern dies down in the winter. They're easy to grow, virtually pest-free, and they have this lush green, wonderful growth that imparts a sense of calm to the garden that I really like. And western sword fern especially is quite tolerant of dry summers. If there's damage, you can cut back all the damaged fronds after the winter. The new growth will come out fresh and green, and actually it's a really nice way to treat the plant. And they combine really nicely with other shade lovers. Useful for texture contrasts. And I will show you a picture. There's western sword fern coming up. There's a maiden fern coming up, and I dug and dug, and I couldn't get all these images are mine, all these pictures are mine, and I couldn't find a deer fern Blechnum spicans. So, and this is fun picture coming up, I think. And that was just somewhere in the world. I'm going to say it was down in Oregon on a trail, and you know, you can see the maidenhair ferns happy there coming up through the cracks in the little wood retaining wall. So. They will grow nicely. And so I have one last slide. And that was just a few tips. I wouldn't say I'm a great garden designer. I'm saying I'm okay garden designer, but I can't make decisions, which is not a good thing in a designer. You need to be able to make decisions. So I'm more of the, well, I'll try a couple things, then I'll try a couple more. And so these are the tips creating a garden that features native plants. And this, learn about the plants, make sure that you know their needs, and make sure you choose a selection that meets their needs. Start small, choose 1 or 2 of your favorites to add to your existing garden, and then, you know, create pleasing combinations, plan little pleasing combinations of native, non-native plants, so that you can say, I'm switching over a little bit to natives. And my example for this would be use, native ferns grouped with hosta. That's a great shade plant, and Japanese forest grass. I think that's a nice combination of plants. Use them in little small groups or singles. Try not to do mass plantings. You can, but then you lose the feel of our natural environment, which is there's really a mix of things in the natural environment. You don't see that many spaces where you just see it's all Western sword fern. There are some, but even when you look closer, you see that there are other things growing interspersed with them. And then when you're doing problem solving, consider native plants over non-native plants every time, and just see if you can get to that So an example would be a ground cover using the kinnikinick instead of cotoneaster, which is often suggested, or salal instead of pachysandra. So those are just ways you can start to work things in. That's all the time I really have. I think I've probably gone over as far as not leaving time for questions.
We can probably do one or two questions, Scott. We have one that I think a lot of people will want to know. Do you have any favorite native plants that are deer resistant?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the ferns really are deer resistant. So,
Okay.
but they don't fit. I think ribes is deer resistant too. The flowering currant. Sorry, I go back and forth on those on the terminology. And that is actually one of sort of how can you live on Vancouver Island and not have some resistance to deer as a plant? You really have to. So I don't see a problem with salal. I don't see a problem with kinnikinick. I don't see deer chewing that up. Is that a fair answer for some of those? I think you've got much more chance. We always argue, like, I think they'll eat the soft growth of Mahonia,
Right.
but they won't eat the harder growth because it is why it is. That's why it is what it is. It's spiky because it's trying to keep the deer at bay. And its bronze new growth is to try and keep insects at bay because they do not recognize red very well. So red new growth, so the insects won't get them, but the deer will chomp down the new growth on a Mahonia.
Okay, that is great. Thank you so much, Scott, for that great presentation. Yeah, that's probably it time-wise, but I know there's a few questions left in the chat. Scott, would you have time to stick around after, or if not,
Yeah,
we can...
for sure. I got a little bit of time, I think.
Okay, I'll just make a few closing comments, and then anyone who still has a question and wants to stay on can stay on. So I hope everyone enjoyed themselves, and I hope you learned about how you can make a difference in your community by being a bit more plant-wise by integrating some native plants into your garden. So be sure to check out our ISAM page for more details on the events going on this month, find things going on around BC, and a link to our store where you can pick up some swag, such as our plant-wise stickers. And next week, we'll be focusing on Play, Clean, Go. So be sure to join us again for our Wednesday Lunch and Learn, where we'll be joined by Louise Peterson, the Executive Director for the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC, as she explores the significance of responsible outdoor recreation and its crucial role in stewarding natural spaces. So thank you all so much. If you do have a question, maybe just Scott will give us a few more minutes to answer those. But otherwise, enjoy your day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Allison, how do you want to do that with questions?
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to go through the chat and pick the easy ones to answer? Do you want to dig into nativars versus cultivars that Kim Wilkinson brought up? I would have loved to talk about that more.
Yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of the questions are sort of around that. So if you want to go into nativars a bit more, that would be great. And yeah, whenever you need to get off, we can typically, if we have questions, we sometimes push it to 12:45, but no later than that. So if you need to leave, that's great too. But otherwise, yeah, I think we'd all love to hear a little bit more about the nativar topic.
Yeah, and it's a pretty deep and complex topic. So I think Kim has hit on one of the sort of most the sensitive points of using varieties that have been chosen for a particular purpose, and then a nativars they're a cultivated variety of a native plant, and generally speaking, not 100%, but they're almost always clones. So the same plant, they all have exactly the same genetic material. I don't believe that all nativars do not have the same ecological benefits as the as the species. So if I'll use the really extreme example is if you have a coneflower or echinacea and it's a single bloom coneflower, there's one of the things is it's got access to or pollinators have access to the bloom and are able to take advantage of that. And then you get a variety like Double Delight that is just this big ruffle of petals, and it actually restricts access from the bee that's trying to get at it. So that's very that's very much on the extreme end of that's of no use to the pollinator. Sometimes the colors they come up with, like, you have a cultivar and you got a new variety that is actually a different color, doesn't attract the pollinator the same way. So that's not of use either. But sometimes the cultivar, like in the example of a kinnikinick, is just like a glossier leaf and does not have a negative impact on wildlife or on pollinators. And so, it's different for each plant. And I think that one of the things that we have some concern over is the lack of genetic. If all you planted was, and all that was in the world was a kinnikinick, Vancouver jade, and they're all a clone of each other, you wouldn't have the same genetic variability. So that would not be good. You can't have that. But to use some in a garden space, I think isn't unreasonable. And I'm not an expert. There's lots of great articles out there. A variety of this new Salal that has really bright, it's Cascade Sunrise, has really brighter new growth. Is that going to have a negative impact? Not sure. It's fairly new one. So I think the questions will be, does it bloom as well as the species? Because that'll be important for access for bee pollination is a big part of Salal. So could go on probably, and I don't mind discussions about that, because that way I get to learn too. So I'm so happy that Kim brought it up.
All right, thank you. Do you have time for maybe one more? And I think
Sure.
We've got a lot of really great but some complex questions coming in. And Scott, if you're okay with it, maybe we can send an email to you of any missed ones, and we can send it out later on, just in the interest of your time.
Sure thing.
Okay, so I had one from Amelia. Would you consider plants found within Canada to be native, or do you limit your native plantings to British Columbia plants only?
Yeah, we probably even go down into the more regional than that, for things that don't grow. And, so there are plants that are native to the west coast of British Columbia that are also native to Northern California. And maybe at a higher elevation there, or maybe at the same elevation. There's what's the name of that plant? Shoot, Oxalis Oregon. There's an Oregonia that's really this low growing thing that's named after Oregon, is a native here. But I don't think, and there are natives, we share native plants with, say, Ontario. There's some things that have a range across the country. I don't know that much about that because I live here. There are a bunch of natives, and they're not native here. So no, I can't consider, because it's native to Canada, to be native. I think you want to kind of stay within your region from the standpoint of being able to sustain all the things we talked about with, it's resilient because it's evolved in this climate, and it is great for beneficial insects and pollinators, because that they evolved with each other all the way along. So that's why we don't really have a great Asclepia that really supports monarch butterflies. It's a little bit different here.
And one more that is super relevant, if you don't mind. Okay, so it's good to see more native plants becoming available in garden centers, but there are still too many invasive plants being sold. What do you see as the responsibility of garden centers such as Gardenworks in this respect? At the very least, it would be good to see them flagged as problematic, e.g. Vinca. And we were just talking about this, and you've been a plant one.
We were talking about, right? Yeah. So we've certainly been working with at Gardenworks. We've been working with the Invasive Species Council for you said 12 years. I can't remember when we started. 2009 or 2008 is when I found our first policy on invasive plants. So we don't sell Vinca, we don't sell English ivy, but you have to keep that policy up. Alice and I were talking about that too. And one of the things the Invasive Species Council is working on is having plant-wise partners. So I have no desire to sell an invasive species that I know is no good. I don't want to flag it in the garden center. People don't always read every sign you put up in the garden center. So in flagging this, hey, this is invasive, ain't going to work. It's got to be not there. And then there's Maybe there's some in the middle ground where you say you'll do that just because it's better than nothing, but really you can't be selling invasive plants that are causing economic damage and, you know, are a threat to our native environment. Yeah. And so it's just an ongoing process. You got to get better and better, and we all do. And I think that as the public gets more and more aware of the issues, and we have a program like PlantWise, it's really, you signed on to that and said you're going to maintain a certain standard. And we're going to dig into that this year, I think, better as Invasive Species Council, and make sure that we get some partners on that, and then hopefully roll it out more. And it's like a certification, you know, if you go that, so support those garden centers, the ones that are supporting those efforts. Do you want to add anything to that? Because this is deep for you too. You're big on that.
Yes. I just popped a link into the chat about our PlantWise program, and we will have kind of an updated partnership with a bunch of retailers going forward that will be focusing on getting more and more retailers involved with stopping the spread of invasive plants in BC. Not quite ready to go on that yet, but stay tuned and make sure you subscribe to our e-news if you haven't already. And yeah, I think in the interest of time, we'll leave it there. We will be sending out a follow-up email with some questions and answers and more information on the PlantWise program. But thank you so much for coming today, and we hope to see you at next week's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks, everybody. Great questions.